Today, we're finally realizing the degree to which the Chinese Communist Party is truly hostile to the United States and our values.
Beijing insists that these are somehow internal matters that others have no right to raise. That is wrong.
The police officer responded that pandemic prevention is the department's top priority and said nothing else was important.
The Chinese Communist Party, an opaque regime now at the helm of authoritarianism globally. Today, we'll take a peek behind this new iron curtain into the world of China's communist officialdom.
官场特别残酷，特别黑暗。
Much is hidden from our view by the workings of a massive propaganda apparatus.
他们每天要做一个虚假的，
非讲假话不可。
正直的人的话，他不可能用你，
不敢有思想，不敢有态度。
Few researchers know as much about the Chinese communist leadership as award-winning filmmaker Kay Rubacek, author of Who Are China's Walking Dead? She's also the former host of the NTD show Life and Times.
They're under extreme pressure, and they're constantly being forced to separate from their conscience, and eventually it breaks them.
Kay has interviewed dozens of former communist officials and pored through official documents and speeches to understand the worldview of people serving the regime.
谁还是想共产党不镇压，共产党不杀人？你这个理论都没学对呀。
Today we'll dive into the warped world of China's communist leadership, one largely hidden from public view until now. I met with Kay in the Hudson Valley in upstate New York, where Kay lives and her company Swoop Films is based. You know, it's really beautiful here.
It is. And, you know, this is actually the longest elevated pedestrian walkway in the world. And I grew up on a river, so being by the water is like a second home for me.
And why the Hudson Valley?
This area, actually, for centuries, artists have come to this area. I mean, just the natural beauty of it has been an inspiration for people for a long time. And I think as a filmmaker, I find a lot of inspiration here too.
Seems like a really unlikely place where you'd be researching the Walking Dead of China.
It's true for a topic like that, but it's actually because of that topic being so heavy and there's a lot of negativity in it. Coming to a place like this, being able to get out into nature, it gives me that pause to be able to process that information and just take a step back and see things more clearly.
It turned out Kay and I actually share some similar family backgrounds. My family had escaped communist Poland while her family fled from Russia and Czechoslovakia. So taking on communism, that's something that's a bit in your family history, isn't it?
It is personal to me because my family escaped communism first in Russia and then in China. And they came to a place like this, essentially. There's freedom of belief, freedom of speech. But these are the kind of things that I take for granted.
While Nazi leaders faced the Nuremberg trials, there was no equivalent for the Soviet leadership. Fast forward to today, recent polls suggest 40% of Americans have a favorable view of socialism.
Half of young Americans, millennials born between 1981 and 1996, want to live in a socialist country.
Socialism is always popular among young people, perhaps more so now.
But few Americans can imagine what it actually means to live in a socialist country today. So when I was 5 years old, I remember standing in bread lines in Poland. And I didn't really think much of it, actually. It was more the reward at the end. You know, you got this delicious bread to eat. I don't think people in North America associate China with anything remotely resembling a bread line.
You're right, because we don't see bread lines anymore. The CCP's learned that. They've learned you don't show these things. So there's no bread lines now. If people want bread, they give them bread. It's all about maintaining absolute control over the whole country. That's what the CCP does. So we see things like these shiny buildings in China, and you see it all the time, that look at how the economy's grown and expanded. But that's on the surface. What's going on beneath hasn't changed, the essence of what they're doing.
Even today, we see commentary that the US and other Western democracies should cooperate or engage with China, or that the Chinese Communist model is even superior.
We've been trying to work with China for the last 10 years. I am personally very impressed and very encouraged by China's progress.
We had things to sell, and China is our biggest customer. Xi Jinping had his own agenda.
For the past 40 years, many have praised this authoritarian communist model, despite ever-increasing evidence of human rights atrocities occurring in China.
This is where the CCP thinks they've tricked us, because they know very clearly that the West thinks about concepts differently, and they use that to their advantage. Like, they will say, we no longer have forced labor, we have drug rehabilitation centers, and we say, good for you, well done. But it's a lie. They know we can't go in there and prove them wrong. So a fundamental thing I've found through interviewing these Chinese officials is that they are the closest to the CCP culture. And their point of view, that culture, is completely different to ours.
What explains this radical culture gap between those living in China and those living in the free world? Kay wanted to find out more. And her journey began here with a strange story.
One can't really imagine it unless one experiences it themselves. If the story of my family is made public, I know it will bring a lot of danger. Maybe they will go after my family members.
Kay's recent documentary, Finding Courage, touches on the Chinese regime's long history of brutality against its own citizens. It centers around the story of two sisters, one killed by the regime in a labor camp because she practiced the Falun Gong spiritual practice, and her sister Yifei, a former journalist living in exile in San Francisco, who seeks justice for her sister's death. I invited Kay to our studios in Manhattan to tell us more about what she uncovered in her interviews and research.
So about Finding Courage, the film that spawned the book, I haven't seen anything remotely like this sort of undercover footage from a Chinese labor camp, no less, anywhere. I mean, how did you manage to swing this?
The two main characters in the movie, they were both high-ranking journalists in China. One of them escaped to America. The other one stayed in China and continued working as a journalist. But at the same time, he was there protecting the remains of their sister's body, who was killed, murdered in a labor camp more than 16 years ago, and her remains are being held in a morgue under lock and key by a labor camp. And people say to me, how is it possible that a labor camp in China could do that? Why would they do that? And why would they pay $3,000 a year to maintain the body as they're doing?
Wait, so the labor camp is paying?
Yes, the labor camp is paying that amount of money every year to maintain the body.